Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics, and tonight we are celebrating the Year of the Snake with a truly revolutionary martial arts film from Hong Kong's legendary Golden Harvest Studios. From 1971, it's The Big Boss, the film that really put Bruce Lee on the map as an international star. Now, joining me tonight is a very prolific actor and martial artist. You've seen his work in such films as Cold Mountain, The Missing, Adaptation. He's even acted alongside the likes of Jean-Claude Van Damme in the iconic 1994 film Street Fighter. Please welcome Mr. Jay Tavare. How are you doing tonight, Jay?
Hi, guys. My pleasure to be here.
As an actor who has quite a prominent background in the action genre, what does Bruce Lee mean to you?
Oof, that's a loaded question. I mean, as a child, when I first discovered Bruce, was before he actually became famous. I grew up watching that wuxia genre, as they called it, the legendary Chinese movies that would come out. And the stories was always about someone who was unjustly challenged or his master was murdered. Then he would retreat into the mountains, find the Grand Master, and learn the 5 fingers of death. And then he would come back to vengeance his master dramatically. So, and back then in the 1970s, there was quite a few, both Hong Kong and Korean and Taiwanese stars who kind of like controlled the market in the movies. But if you watch those movies, it was so controlled and choreographed. Everything was like a dance. It was like very entertaining. So Bruce, the first time he ever appeared on stage, and when first time I saw him, it caught my eye. Even as a 10-year-old, I was like, who's that? I didn't know who Bruce Lee was. But you could see he moved different. He had a coolness about him. There was an explosiveness about him. The guy was different. But if I said what Bruce Lee means to me, it's because his philosophy of life, the man was such a philosopher, and the way he looked at life, the way he would examine the unexamined elements in life, all of that is what really attracted me to him. That he was, because I was a deep thinker as a child. I still am in a way, and I found that aspect of him exploring the unexplored was really exciting. And he would say that famous saying, when you see something, take what you can use, discard what you don't need, and add your own little flavor. Those 3 little words really sums up how I've lived my life. It's you don't necessarily need a master, but you can always watch, observe, learn, utilize what you can, and add your own flavor to whatever it is. Whether it was breakdancing that I did, whether I learned the nunchakas, but that's really how life is. And I thought Bruce was the most inspirational human being I had seen in a long time. I didn't really have many heroes, maybe Muhammad Ali, but Bruce was up there for me as a child. And it was what I call a kinetic genius. The way he moved, the way he was able to control his body, and plus the way he looked physically in the 1970s. I don't think anybody had seen. I mean, we had the bodybuilders who were big, puffy guys, but this guy was ripped, shredded at maybe 146 pounds or something, and phenomenal. Just an exceptional human being in every sense of the word.
Oh, absolutely. And he certainly had a fascinating background. His parents were from China. They were Chinese opera performers, but he was born in the United States because they were on tour. And I
San
know,
Francisco.
oh yeah, right in San Francisco. And if you want to talk about that a little bit, I know as a child, he was a childhood star in Hong
Yeah,
Kong. He acted from when he was a little kid.
he did. In fact, he did several films with his father, and he showed definitely talent even at that young age. But I know as a teen, he got involved with like street gangs and fighting. In Hong Kong, there was a fad. They do these rooftop fights where they would get on the rooftop and try to see who had a better punch or whatever. And, he made a quick name for himself. And apparently Bruce was a pretty good cha-cha dancer. In fact, he was Hong Kong champion dancer, something else I have in common with him. And I feel dancing definitely helps martial art, because to be a great dancer, you need rhythm, you need precision, you need agility, and all of that interprets really well into martial arts. You know, the best boxers have rhythm, the best fighters have rhythm, and they understand timing just like a dancer does. And in fact, film fighting in many ways resembles more of like a choreographed dance than a real fight.
It's all choreography. Yeah.
Yeah, but Bruce understood that. He says, when you see me in a movie do all of this is fancy stuff. In real life, I might just go pow in your face. You know, so it's not about looking pretty in a real fight, whereas you can make it fancy if you wanted to. But when you see the most effective fighters, I mean, when I look at Muhammad Ali when he fought the scary George Foreman, the final punch that knocked him out was just the pop. That's the simplest punch. That's why many people thought it was staged, because they couldn't believe, they didn't understand how Ali had wore him down by the rope-a-dope, leaning on the rope and letting him beat him in his phenomenal abdominal he had, and tired Foreman to the point in that humidity of Africa. So he was tired. He's a big man. All that muscle requires oxygen. Ali's fight IQ was high, and that's what Bruce, by the way, had too. Because I think what he learned from Wing Chun and all those street fights in Hong Kong was that he really loved the element of combat. He wasn't so much interested in entering tournaments and winning titles, but how to be the most effective weapon possible with his limbs. And I think that's what eventually led him to create Jeet Kune Do, because what he wanted to do was not expressed in any martial art that existed at the time.
Yeah, no, like you mentioned earlier, take what's useful, throw away what's not, and then create something new out of it. And that really is the philosophy of his Jeet Kune Do style. Now, as I mentioned, this movie came out in 1971. Bruce did have a career as a childhood actor, or as a child actor when he was a kid. But then he tried making it in Hollywood. His best known role from this era was as Kato in the Green Hornet TV show back in the mid 60s. But I know there was a lot of frustration at that time as an Asian American trying to break through onto the big screen. And that's what kind of brought him back to Hong Kong in the early 70s.
Exactly. In fact, the show was canceled, and the show in Hong Kong was known as the Kato Show, not the Green Hornet. And so Bruce had already a name, like kind of, if it was nowadays, he would have been an influencer, you know? So he was already, people had noticed it. And the most impressive thing about that was that Bruce was so fast that he literally had to rearrange his style to be able to be captured on the old cameras. Even these new cameras, 24 frames a second, was not fast enough to capture his movement. So you had to physically slow down to be able to sell the punches and the kicks. And by the time he came back to Hong Kong, the Golden Harvest made him that offer to start the thing. And in fact, it's interesting because Big Boss was not without issues and problems. When he started it, there was a fight choreographer who obviously had different ideas than Bruce. And they clashed for a while till they realized they had to let Bruce do Bruce. And I think it was the first time he had introduced one of his classic, what's called a triple kick. It was like a crescent kick followed by a round kick and then another kick, 3 kicks in a row. It was like a pang, pang, pang. It would spin. It's the first time he showed that, and nobody ever seen that style of spinning and kicking in films. The final battle with Big Boss with the knife, which was like legendary, that fight for the time.
Certainly. I think even today it holds up pretty well. Now, for people in the audience, maybe they've seen Enter the Dragon and they've seen some of these later martial arts films. What do they have to look forward to in The Big Boss? How would you set the tone?
Big Boss is, in many ways, it shows Bruce in his rawest form. He's raw in there. He shows humor. He shows, the idea of Bruce always liked to play the reserve character where he doesn't want to fight. He has made a promise to his mother. He's wearing his pendant and he refuses all of that. So it's like in the end, he's dragged into this conflict with the underworld and the smuggling among the ice factory and all of that. So he gets dragged into it. But what I was surprised when I saw Big Boss the first time, the violence level in the movie is pretty high. I mean, it's not just your normal martial art movie. There's axes and knives and even hacksaws and ice picks. Like it's brutal. It's like street fighting in many ways. It's and I love that element. He made it like exciting, to look at that level of carnage in a movie. There was a lot of blood and gore. I remember the uncut version I saw was a pretty, like, for a teenager, was a hardcore movie.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, even today, I mean, it's pretty shocking stuff, but I think it's still a lot of fun.
it is. It's a great film to see. This. I mean, I've actually shown it to some of my young friends that are in their 20s. That I invite them sometimes. I say, okay, today I'm going to show you a movie from the 1970s. And I remember the first time I actually sat a group of 20-year-olds to watch Bruce Lee. And they said, when was this movie made? And I said, 1970, whatever. And they all rolled their eyes. They were expecting like a real fossil of a movie, But to my surprise was when the movie ended, I think I showed them Enter the Dragon. They were all blown away. They said, that was 1972? I said, they couldn't believe it, that Bruce, and even the content of the film held up all the way 50 years later. So that's the testimony to the man's skill and art, that even this many years later, not just he exists, but in many ways, everybody's getting to know him. I mean, I'm seeing him on TikTok now, all these videos that are popping out. And I'm just afraid because there's one element that they're making him like a superhuman, and there was superhuman aspects to Bruce, because I've talked to Gene LaBelle and people who personally knew him, and they said Bruce was almost like a magician. He had all these little tricks he could do to baffle you. Put a coin in your hand and snap it out and change it to another coin, or do one finger press ups and shit that you've never seen. Throw 4 or 6 punches in a second. So all of that would baffle you if you had never seen it, or the 1-inch punch. I mean, they literally had some magical element to him, so he could baffle you with his repertoire of skills that he had. But and I think that's what it takes actually to get someone's attention nowadays. I mean, when you look at the MMA fighters, we only get impressed when someone has something more, something like John Jones, who never lost or whatever, or or even McGregor when he came on the scene. He certainly had that flamboyantness that made MMA so popular. So Bruce definitely had that charisma and that presence that is so rare in any movie star nowadays.
Right, and you mentioned MMA. In a lot of ways, his Jeet Kune Do style, that was the original mixed martial arts.
Yeah, I mean, some people call him the founder in many ways, because what he said was what MMA became. To mix all the styles and become a complete fighter. And even if you look at his films, he used grappling all the way back then. And in fact, he learned grappling from Gene LaBelle, funny enough. And so even in Enter the Dragon, when he finishes that first fight, is a submission. He doesn't knock the guy out. He doesn't punch him out. He turns him into some kind of some kind of an arm neck roll that he created. It almost looks like an arm bar, but it's like, traps him in that position and he taps out. So when you think about it, who did that? I've never seen someone tap out in 1970s. It was always either like a John Wayne style fighting, punching, or brawling, or it was the martial art karate, kung fu style of fighting. But I've never seen someone really grapple someone, choke him out, or tap him out. And Bruce was again. So when you look at it, in fact, the opening scene in Enter the Dragon in many ways resembles the Octagon fighters. They've got the fingerless gloves. They're wearing the little briefs. They're topless, And
that's right, yeah.
It's in many ways, it was like a prelude to what happened with MMA. They fight in very similar. There were the little tight shorts, maybe not as brief as Bruce, because that was like a Speedo he was wearing, but it reminds me, when I see these fighters, it always reminds me of that opening scene with the fingerless gloves and the way they start the fight. So yeah, I mean, ahead of his time. That's the word that comes to mind. He was a trailblazer. He was ahead of his time, and he really set the groundwork for what we have now. I mean, we have to be. If you're honest, you'll admit to that.
Certainly, and I think the audience is definitely going to see that tonight. Mr. Jay Tavare, thank you so much for your time. If you're in the audience, please stick around after the movie so you can hear the rest of our conversation. Without further ado, from 1971, directed by Lo Wei, I knew this movie growing up as Fist of Fury in America, but we're going to see it under its original title, The Big Boss.
Oh yeah.
Well, like you mentioned, that movie, it may not be as polished or sophisticated as some of the movies that came out a little bit later, but like you said, we're seeing Bruce Lee in his most raw, kind of purest form.
It's so true. And the energy. I mean, just the energy he brings to the fight scenes. It was. I mean, even now watching it again, I realize is that he had that je ne sais quoi on screen. He's really at it. And I think in Hollywood, people had noticed that they just didn't know how to market him till finally Warner Brothers took a gamble with him. But it really was. He had, it was undeniable. You hear that expression, undeniable. He was undeniable. He had that star quality that, funny enough, I saw it in his son Brandon as well, and Shannon in many ways, who's followed, who's basically, she's now spearheading Bruce Lee Foundation and the Bruce Lee Club. And she's a talented martial artist, although a lot of people say things, but I actually trained with her, and she had a mean sidekick, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Received it a few times.
Well, it's definitely genetic. It runs in the family. But how did you end up meeting Shannon and Brandon Lee in the first place? How did that come about?
All in different ways. Shannon she would come sometimes and train with Benny Urquidez, Benny the Jet, at the Jet Center. He still is a legendary martial artist who in many ways adopted what Bruce had and even created his own fighting style, Yukido-kan, which means a way of life. And Yukido-kan is almost the same philosophy as Bruce, because Benny was one of the first to actually go and fight the Muay Thai guys in Thailand. And he fought the Japanese shoot fighters and the Australian boys. And he was one of the first to actually use arm throws and drops in the middle of a karate match. So nobody had seen that. And back then they called it the American Karate Association. So, but it was really a full contact boxing, kickboxing. And Benny came from a boxing background, just like Bruce. And so Shannon used to train with us. That's how I met her. Brandon, sadly, I met just a few years before his passing. I mean, when he did The Crow, he was only 28. But he was around Hollywood in that period. And again, I met him because there's a small circle of people who were doing those type of movies. That was when Jean-Claude ruled the airways. And in fact, funny enough, Jean-Claude trained with Benny back in the day too. Benny the Jet was a very symbolic trainer and martial art master in that era. And he was a legend, and he still is. And so everybody would end up with him in his classes. And and as far as Linda, I just met her as one of the book signings and stuff that she had, But Shannon was who I knew the most out of them.
Yeah. And is she? Do you still? Are you still in contact with her? Have you stayed in touch?
Sometimes I'm still. She's very sweet, but she's so involved now in the Bruce Lee Foundation and what they do, and it's very impressive what they've done now with even the merchandising. They've really stepped it up, which I thought it was time, because Bruce just had such a charismatic, and all those great photos of him that exist. You just need a great graphic artist to create. I'm a sucker. I've got even the shirt I'm wearing tonight in his honor, the little dragon. I can see your Bruce back there.
Yeah, I know. I had to bring this up. I mean, talk about like the quality, like what they're doing nowadays. It's incredible what they're doing.
Yeah. I got 3 little. I think one of these is from Game of Death. If I'm not no, here. I think this is from Big Boss.
Yeah, right. Yeah, with the white shirt.
That's that chick in Big Boss.
Oh, that is awesome.
And I've got him. This is his Enter the Dragon.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, right. The iconic look.
And I believe this is from Kato, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah. Green Hornet. Yeah, yeah.
I think so. That when he used to wear the old black,
The casual.
it could be the Chinese connection. I'm not sure, but yeah, he's everywhere nowadays. You see Bruce from commercials to magazine covers to he's become like part of our pop culture. It's pretty amazing. I mean, who would have imagined 50 years later his name? I mean, how many people from 50 years ago we still talk about, or we still, wear their T-shirts? you know, he's
Well, to me, no, I was just gonna say, to me, there's a handful of icons, cultural icons, where even today, even if you've never seen one of their movies, you know the silhouette, you know their name. So it's, to me, it's like Bruce Lee, Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, and John Wayne. Where even today, people still know the name, they still know the presence, and I always get sad when you watch these movies. Like if you watch from Big Boss to Fist of Fury, Way of the Dragon, Enter the Dragon, even to Game of Death, the movies just kept getting better and better, and these were made in a span of maybe 2 years, and it breaks my heart that Bruce Lee, he fought so hard for that success, he didn't even get to live to see the lasting impact that he had.
no. Apparently, he saw a final cut of Enter the Dragon without the music. He
Mm-hmm.
did see his hard work, but he did never saw. I mean, he must have imagined this was going to be amazing because he could see his work, but the music wasn't even on it by Leno Schaffer, that wonderful soundtrack. But yeah, I mean, it's heartbreaking that everything he worked for happened, but after he left, after
Yeah.
he left us. So
Well, you mentioned earlier, we talked about, obviously, like, his charisma, his presence is undeniable on the big screen. But I think it's worth noting, since Big Boss was his first big Hong Kong movie, and maybe you can tell the story. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but in the film, there's kind of two Coleys. There's Bruce Lee, and then James Tien plays his cousin, who's kind of, the big strapping martial artist in the film.
mhm.
And do you know the story behind this? Do you know where I'm getting at?
No, keep going. I mean, I know who you're talking about, but what happened?
So originally, when they were shooting this film, in the script, it says halfway through the movie, we're going to kill off one of these guys, and then the other one is going to avenge him at the end of the film. Well, at the movie, Raymond Chow, the head of Golden
No,
Harvest,
yeah.
he didn't know. Like, he said, okay, we're going to give both of these guys a shot, James Tien and Bruce Lee. We're going to look at the dailies. Whoever has the most charisma, we're going to kill the other guy off. So at a certain point, James Tien, I think he's a really great martial artist. He pops up
Yeah,
in a lot of these movies in the 70s and 80s. But
yeah,
yeah, you just feel so bad because it's like, oh, in an alternate universe, maybe he would have been the next Bruce Lee. But no, it's like, it's
yeah.
awesome that Bruce Lee, like, they were willing to take a gamble on this guy who had done like, he had done the Kato show, right? The Green Hornet was so popular, but they didn't know if he could carry a whole, 90-minute movie.
I think he had a career post Bruce, if I'm not mistaken, and he was also in Way of the Dragon.
Yeah.
He was one of the waiters in the restaurant when Bruce comes from Hong Kong to help him. So Bruce directed that movie, so he definitely cast him again to be one of the guys in there, and he stays all the way to the end when he gets stabbed to death by the villainous restaurant manager.
Right. Well, it's
Right
funny, even in this
before,
movie.
no?
Yeah, no. Well, in this movie, a lot of the guys, like even like the big boss's nephew or whoever, a lot of the guys in the cartel, they're really distinctive looking, right? So if you watch all like those, even like in Chinese Connection, I always get them because when I was a kid, this movie was
I
Fist
know
of Fury.
the names.
Yeah, they switched it around. And well, do you want to explain that, why it is the way it is? Were you familiar with that?
I don't remember exactly why they did, but I remember like because Enter the Dragon came out and Bruce got famous with that. Prior, the movie he had directed, which was called The Way of the Dragon,
Right.
be called
Return of the Dragon.
Return of the Dragon.
Yeah.
They released because it came in after Enter the Dragon, so the studios released it as Return of the Dragon, although it was an older film. But I had seen these with their original names. Like I know Big Boss as Big Boss.
So the story with Big Boss, it's interesting. When they released this in 1973 in the States, they changed the title to Fist of Fury, which you're a fan of the Hong Kong movies. His second film, which we know as The Chinese Connection, was originally called Fist of
Exactly.
Fury. So they switched the titles around. So my understanding was, if you look at The Big Boss, it's essentially a movie about like drug smuggling. It's Bruce Lee going up against a powerful drug cartel. So they want the idea was they were going to release that in the United States as The Chinese Connection to cash in on the French Connection, right, with Gene
Yeah.
Hackman, which was very popular. But something happened in the distribution system where they put the wrong title on the wrong movie. So this movie became Fist of Fury, and
That's
then
the fun. I believe that.
yeah,
I believe that because back then, if you think about it, films were all in these big metal cans, and
yeah,
even all the way up to 1980s, 1990s, when a movie would open up in like 2,000, 3,000 theaters, they had to get those metal reels to each theater. You
hmm,
know, print would cost $2,000. So each print of the movie was 2,000. The studios had to safeguard them because that's how movies used to get pirated. On the way to the theater, someone would go to a friend, would get a pirate version and send it out to China or whatever. So it was before the digital era. So
right.
it was different. But anything to do with Bruce, I mean, even nowadays, he gets probably one of the most pirated stuff out there. I mean, Bruce Lee t-shirts that are unauthorized are everywhere. I see them, in every page of Temu or Shein. I look, there's all kinds of Bruce Lee stuff that I know it's nothing to do with Bruce Lee Foundation. So
Right. Well, it's like Elvis or John Wayne, right? There's Bruce
it
Lee
is.
plates and bobbleheads and what I
I
mean,
mean,
you
like I
name
just
it.
said, look at his name is with those level Elvis, Bruce Lee, Muhammad Ali. These are like once in 100 years you get a character like that. There's the other martial artists, there's other boxers, but there's only one Muhammad Ali, one Bruce Lee.
You
One,
know, this Oh no, absolutely. Let me ask you, and I know this is sort of a morbid thing to think about. You know,
yeah,
you watch a movie like Way of the Dragon. I think it's a very, of course, as you mentioned, he directed that film. He did such a fabulous job
yeah.
with it. And then Enter the Dragon, things were just getting bigger and better.
Oh,
Had he lived, right? Obviously, he would have had a really successful career. Do you think we would have had an opportunity? Would there have been an opening in the culture for his successors like Sammo Hung, Jackie Chan, even like, Jet Li, Donnie Yen? Do you think
well, I mean,
that
to be
would have?
honest, all of those names you just mentioned are on the map because of Bruce.
Hmm.
Literally because of Bruce. Because prior to Bruce, Chinese men were not considered marketable. Chinese women, maybe if they were beautiful, whatever, they would play maybe a secondary role in a film. But Chinese men, for whatever reason, was considered not marketable. That's why in a movie, in a series like Kung Fu, where it was written for a Chinaman who's roaming the Wild West, Bruce was considered too Chinese to play the role. They
Hmm.
picked David Carradine and made him look slant-eye. I mean, that's just how weird Hollywood was back then. We've come a long way since then. I mean, when you think about it, but yeah, I mean, he was ahead of his time. The world and Hollywood wasn't ready, wasn't really ready, and people were in denial. I mean, like I said, he was on denial. But when you saw the guy, you saw his charisma, you saw his presence, and yet, you know, and even to this day, people are portraying him like Quentin in his movie or whatever. There's many people are guessing who he was because there's so many stories about him. Was he arrogant? Was he as good as he was? Was he really as deadly as he was? But according to Shannon and the people who knew him personally, none of those portrayals are correct. I mean, there was
Hmm.
obviously an arrogance about anyone who's that good, but he answered the question really well once when someone said, "Are you really that good?" He goes, "Listen, if I tell you I'm really that good, you think I'm showing off. If I tell you I'm no good, you know I'm lying." So that answered the question. And you don't have to ask those questions. You just have to watch what the guy was doing. I mean, look at that one moment in Long Beach in that demonstration. It's so historic what he did there. He just
Hmm.
literally blew the roof off that auditorium with what he did. That the grandmasters in front of him, one of them, he stood like 6 feet, and he said, "All I'm going to do, I'm going to attack you. Try to block my attack from 6 feet away." not even standing in front of him. And he was able to explode and get a punch in before this grandmaster could even go like this, before his brain had not even seen the move. I mean, that's literally like when they talk about speed, Bruce had taken speed to a new level. His fast twitch and the way he had trained, it was like, I've always, because when I was a child, I was fascinated with speed. I like fast cars, I like fast runners, I like anything fast. And that's why Bruce was such an interesting character, because he had taken speed to a new level. When you're that fast, it's, you wonder how you're going to fight someone who can always hit you before you can move. And that's a good question. So,
well, I'm interested too. As I mentioned earlier, the movie came out in 1971. It was not released in the United States until 1973, and it was a really short, like what in the span of maybe 2 years, he was just doing these movies back to back. But a lot of times, but really because of the nature of the industry, we didn't get most of these movies in the United States until after he had passed away. So do you
yeah.
remember when you were a kid? Do you remember when Bruce Lee died, or did you discover the
Oh,
films
yeah.
afterwards?
I cried. My father, I just seen, I mean, like I said, I had seen Big Boss, I had seen Fist of Fury, I had seen the early Bruce, but I didn't really understand who Bruce Lee was till Enter the Dragon came. And I still remember the trailer for Enter the Dragon. It was just, back then in the 70s, it was a deep voice, and he would go, forget James Bond, forget Shaft, forget whoever was, Billy Jack. There's a new hero in town, and his name is what? And then they would show one of these clips from Enter the Dragon, and that's all it took for most people to go, holy moly, I gotta see this. So then I remember soon after that, in 1973, my dad pulled me aside and said, do you know he just died? And I was like, what? And it was just like, he looked the epitome of power and strength, and in a young mind, I could not digest that. It really was very hard. And I remember I actually cried. It was that impactful. And I was like, how could this be? And I remember I collected as many magazines in the 70s with these pictures and stuff. And my mom recently gave them away, which I wanted to kill her. I said to her, do you realize that those collection was worth money? Because these are all actual magazines from 1970s. So, but hey, another kid is having fun with them. Great for him. But I did. I had the absolute, I couldn't get enough of him. I still remember I went to a shop and I had a white t-shirt, and I said to the guy, I want you to print on my chest Bruce Lee. And he said to me, who's that? That's how unknown he was. So I walked around with Bruce Lee on this white t-shirt, and I felt so cool. And nobody knew who he was. People say, what's that? That's how unknown he was. And I think, sometimes I laugh. I told him, Michelle, I said, I had the first Bruce Lee merchandise. I said, I made it myself. That Bruce Lee. But thank God we had heroes like that as kids. Because I look at the young generation now, with all the difficulties that face them, the world seems so complicated now. But in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, it wasn't that complicated, And in my childhood mind, that fantasy of Bruce and his discipline, his philosophy, and the dream of being like him one day was what drove me to where I am today. I mean, literally, that sparked the life I led because of the impact he had on me as a young man.
Yeah, and I mean, for the people in the audience who may be unfamiliar with your work, you're still in incredible shape. I mean, check out this guy's Instagram, right? You look at you, in Street Fighter, right? You were ripped. You're still in amazing shape. Was that? Oh, man, I wish I was built like that. But when you started your fitness journey, was Bruce Lee? Were you consciously trying to emulate that type of physique?
Oh, absolutely. My father was into wrestling and bodybuilding, but I didn't like his shape. He was thick and burly, and I would say, he would say, come to the gym. I go, no, look at you. You look like, a gorilla. I don't want to look like that. I want to look like Bruce. And my knuckles to this day, if you look at my knuckles, I have knuckles like Bruce because I beat so many walls with these knuckles, and he was known for his knuckles. So to this day, my knuckles look deranged. I've actually lost jobs because my hands look fucking ugly. But but he had that much influence on me. I keep hitting bricks to get those knuckles calloused up, banged up, sticking out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like, put it this way, he was a real life superhero to me. Whereas these days, these kids look at Batman, Robin. We had a real life. This guy was a real life superhero. One finger press ups. He moved faster than lightning. He could, like, you know, in the movies, he could beat up 20 guys. Like, we believed that. You know, when you're a kid, nobody, of course, when you get older, you realize there was elements, you know, like to this day, they say, what would happen if Muhammad Ali fought Bruce? Well, even Bruce said, because that's not someone I want to fight, you know? But the point is, if it came to a street fight, Bruce would still be very dangerous because he would probably kick Ali's knee out, break his shin or something before he would know it, then be more effective. So you got to remember that as well. People always think, oh, it's going to be a ring fight. No, Bruce, you know, in fact, I look at John Jones, he has this oblique kick he does, that he kicks the knee to hyperextend the knee. That's a Bruce move, literally out of Bruce, where he would use his back kick, come through, and kick the shin. Very unusual, almost like a jab, but with his back leg. So, and again, the fight IQ, where he would like go low, and suddenly come up and hit you in the head. So he would like set you up for his moves. And I still remember a story Dan and Asada told, that the first time he sparred with Bruce, he caught Bruce with a good punch, and he knew it was a mistake because Bruce went into combat mode and threw a punch so fast, Dan didn't even see it, connected and broke his jaw with that one shot. Oh, and he said that he sparred the rest of the day with a broken jaw. But that was coming out of Dan's own mouth. And just recently, I heard Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung talking about Bruce, saying how when they were rehearsing for that opening fight scene into the Dragon, he came to move and Bruce's leg was in his face. He said, "Is that good?" Very good. He says, "I just went like this. I hadn't even moved, and the foot was in my face." He had the control. He held it right there. So yeah, it's. I mean, we sound like kids still gushing over him, but for this generation who don't know him, you know, he really was a special kind. And whether half of it might be hype and the other half real, it doesn't even matter. He's become a historic, iconic figure, and he will live through history, because when they look back of when it comes down to like the future combat, even right now, Krav Maga, and even what the military learned is a form of Wing Chun, like something that's very effective in close quarters and is fast, and you take your opponent out fast. It's not about real fighting styles. It's about taking someone out quickly. And I think Bruce had that skill set. He could hurt you, really hurt you with, and at his size, the amount of power he had, because he had trained like the circus guys. He would create static power where he would like hold something. Like I'd heard that he was able to not just curl 75 pounds, but also like put it in front of him like that. So he would not just curl it up, but he would open his arms and come back and go down. So like, it's a tremendous fight. If you ever take a 75-pound barbell,
yeah,
you'll see if you can hold it up in front of you. I hardly doubt it. He had the shoulder strength and the tendon strength, which is what really gave him that power.
Well, I believe that, but even you look at his back, nobody has wings like that, right? When you look at that V shape, it's unbelievable.
That's where the punches came from. If you look at boxers, the best boxers have great lats, because that's where, when you think about hooks or punches, the back is a very important muscle when it comes to fist. And he understood boxing. I mean, Bruce in his book says that the Western boxing is probably one of the most effective forms of fighting, because there's only 4 or 5 punches. And once you master them, it's about letting your hands go. You know, so complex things. Once you learn those jab, hook, left, uppercut, over right, whatever, then after that, oh, I just saw your cat.
Yeah, she wants to steal the spotlight.
The scene in with Chuck Norris.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. And Way of the Dragon. Yeah. We're in the Coliseum.
Bruce put that in there himself. He wanted that cat scene where the cat is playing with the ball. And it's like he's playing now with Chuck. because first he's losing the fight, then he learns, he realizes he has to adapt, he has to change. And he even shows Jeet Kune Do in that scene, because first he loses, his technique is not working against the Grand Karate Master. Then he starts bouncing, he goes to like the boxing kind of thing, and he starts changing his rhythm, and that's when he starts winning. So, I mean, just think about it. For the first directorial, that was an amazing job he did. And like you said, if he had lived, we can only imagine what the world would have had. Not just in movies he was going to, because I've seen some of his pictures that he was dressed up as characters he wanted to play. He wanted to play some ancient characters like wuxia things, go back in time with the long hair and a big staff or sword. So, and then imagine his directorial stuff. He would have continued directing, and even if he's by his 50s and 60s, he might have been an amazing, like John Woo director who would have done, but we can only imagine what would have been. Or even Brandon was just literally at the dawn of his career when he was taken. So this is one of those things we can only say, if only.
You know, it's interesting. Even with Brandon Lee, sometimes I wonder, had he lived, would Keanu Reeves have the career that he's had? Or,
Very
you
true.
know, if Brandon Lee was still around.
Well, he was, after Crow, he was a full-fledged superstar. He would have gone on to play many roles. In fact, he probably would have done Street Fighter as Ryu. He was the perfect Ryu, if you think about it.
And, you know, speaking of Street Fighter, I remember you were telling me a story that when you were on set in Thailand and, you know, you're ripped, you had the full Vega makeup on. I understand you got a pretty flattering comparison too.
Yeah, a lot of the stunt guys and the Thai extras were coming to go, hey, Mister, you look like Bruce Lee. And I thought that was, because I was so ripped. And it's so funny because I look back and I think, wow, I really did achieve that Enter the Dragon kind of definition he had. It was just, there was no fat on us. And it was just the training. Benny was training us 6 hours a day. So really, I got to a ridiculous shape. One of my best shape in my whole life. There's 2 or 3 times I've hit that level of conditioning naturally as well. And that was one of them. That was just, you know, I felt like I could do anything. Jump, if, you know, out of a window, do anything I want. I was just, it's the perfect age.
You're living up to your hero in a lot of ways, because that was the goal, right? Originally, is to like
Yeah.
to
Well,
not.
to this day, I mean, people always say, which of all these 34 films you've done or whatever, which one you love best? And the first one is always something special, and Street Fighter will always have a special place for me. Not just the people I worked with, but also I ended up in Thailand and some of the places that he shot. Actually, I think Big Boss Summer was shot in Thailand.
Right.
So there was a lot of, there was some moments in my mind that I thought about that. I thought, wow, it's actually happening. And I was in a movie with the biggest martial art star of that generation, which was Jean-Claude. I mean, Jean-Claude was at the height of his career in 1990s. He was a full-fledged star. He only worked on our film for 7 weeks, and he, like I said, there was only like 2 or 3 films that he made that type of money on: Street Fighter, Time Cop, and one other one that was his 3 biggest earners in his career. But no one knew at the time that this silly film we were working on, or this was going to be that big.
And I'm just curious too. I mean, I've heard the stories that, you know, Jean-Claude Van Damme at that time liked to party on set and stay in his trailer and do things like that. But did you guys ever get to talk about Bruce Lee, like you or Benny or Kiedis? Did Bruce Lee's name ever come up in kind of the day-to-day conversation?
With Benny, because you know, I clicked with Benny, and Benny in many ways reminded me of Bruce. He was a very philosophical man. Before every class, he would give us a little philosophy things. Then he would start our training. And what was interesting was Benny had taken Bruce's philosophy and ideology and actually had put it into action. And it worked because he defeated almost everyone. For 27 years, he was undefeated, and he had, I think, the record 63 title bouts with 57 knockouts, no losses. And so that just tells you that how effective that style was. And it was literally, he said he learned a lot of the stuff from what Bruce had put out before he created his own fighting style, the Yukidokan. So definitely, we talked about Bruce. He said that he even said he compared. He goes, I did what he said in the ring. I used whatever it take to take out, because I think he was telling us the first time he fought this famous Japanese fighter, Tanaka or whatever, and Tanaka had come in with a punch. He had grabbed his arm and done a shoulder throw and decked him. And the referee and Tanaka had complained, saying, "What is that? You can't do that." And Benya says, "Where in the law says you can't use an arm throw? It's a judo move. We're fighting. I'm going to use the judo move. I'm going to use it." So that's when the rules kind of changed a little bit. They were able to do sweeps and throws. It wasn't just striking anymore, because back then you couldn't hit the face. It was all body strikes back in the beginning. If you think about the full contact karate matches with Chuck Norris, whatever. Chuck is another guy who, you hear all these stories, but he really was a badass. In his days, him and Bill Wallace, those guys really could fight. And Bruce even mentions that these guys were badasses.
Mm-hmm.
But there's stories that they actually had behind door combat sessions that nobody knows. And they say Bruce did win, although Chuck will never admit it. Because I saw him on an interview. He goes, I didn't want to go there. And Bruce didn't want to go there either. But I heard there was, because Bruce was the type who would, just for his own sake, he go, show me what you got,
So it kind of reminds me of Rocky 3, right? Where Apollo Creed and Rocky, they have the sparring match off camera.
He goes ding ding.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it ends. I love it. It's so true.
Yeah. Well, do you have any closing thoughts on the film The Big Boss? Is there anything that you kind of noticed this time around that maybe you didn't remember, or anything that stood out?
Just the fact that Bruce was groundbreaking in the sense he changed Hong Kong fight choreography forever after what he did in that movie. And by the time he sat through the premiere, he knew that he was a full-fledged star. The reaction to that film was unbelievable. And he just became bigger and bigger and bigger, unfortunately, over the next 2 or 3 years. In fact, it was his idea to go to Italy to make his next film, Golden Harvest. I said, no, let's make it here in China. Why do we want to go to? He goes, no. My vision is the Colosseum, gladiators. They're going to have the final battle. He had all this vision. And so because he has so much clout, they gave him the money to do it, because that was an expensive movie for the time. You have to take the crew to Italy. It took, So I would say for all the fans, if you want to get to know Bruce Lee, you have to start with Big Boss. That's where he really started to explore his powers. And you could see over the next 2 or 3 movies, and it climaxes with Enter the Dragon and Game of Death. You could see he was just accelerating, and it's just tragic. It's like a shooting star that was stopped. Because, like you said, well, if you had given him 5 more years, imagine what we would have had. 5 more years. That's all I would say. 5 more years. By the time we would have been 37, we would have seen some of the greatest movies out there. Because he was prolific. He wasn't stopping. He was just getting better and better at his craft.
Certainly. And certainly, even as is, he left behind an incredible body of work. And you bring up a point, you just kind of reminded me, it's worth noting. So the movie came out in 1971. Golden Harvest hadn't been around that long, but Big Boss, as you said, it was so successful, so impactful. It really did change the martial arts genre forever, because really before that, like Shaw Brothers, they were mostly doing the wuxia style kind of sword fighting period piece type movies. And it was the success of the Big Boss that made Shaw Brothers kind of pivot. And it's like, okay, let's focus more on the hand-to-hand combat in movies like, Five Fingers of Death or King Boxer, as they call it over there. But yeah, like really the whole 70s Kung Fu craze was built around the success of the Big Boss.
And try to find his successor. That's a whole different story. Post Bruce, they tried to find Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Bruce G, Bruce everything. It was like Bruce Table. They went through hundreds of auditions, thousands of young pros trying to find another guy who could move or whatever, but no one was even close. I mean, he had set such a standard that you could see it was going to take decades before someone like Jean-Claude, with that type of screen presence and a physique to match, was able to catch our attention. It was literally 1987, I believe. What's it called?
Kickboxer?
Bloodsport.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
In the late 80s. But till then, Hollywood had given up. They realized there was no successor. No one had managed to, the audience hadn't accepted a successor either. And so they had given up on martial art movies. They said, nah, it's not forget it. And Jean-Claude kind of brought it back. If you think and it's funny you mentioned Keanu. Keanu took it to the next level in 1999 with Matrix and what they did. Then they made sure that every actor has to do his own shit after that. There's no longer you can have your, like in Billy Jack, most people don't realize Tom Laughlin wore that hat because that hat was the secret to the movie. Whenever you see Billy Jack fight, the camera is above and the rim hides the actual Taekwondo 7th Dan Korean master who was doing all the fighting. So it's a very clever, that hat was the secret to Billy Jack.
Well, it's smart. Like, I'm a big fan. I love the classic James Bond movies. Obviously, I love Roger Moore and Sean Connery. But some of those fight scenes, you cut to the wide shot, you can tell it's someone else. It's not Roger Moore actually doing his own stuff.
But even Charlie's Angels, I remember when the girls would go, there was a guy with a wig suddenly doing fighting. It was, you could see there's suddenly Jacqueline Smith's shoulders grew big.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a different era now. I mean, you literally, when you see Charlize Theron in a movie doing his fight, she really is doing the fighting. And she did a great job, by the way. I'm a fan of her when she does that. Like in Atomic Blonde, those fight scenes are pretty badass.
Oh, yeah. Atomic Blonde, the Mad Max Fury Road, she was great in that. She definitely holds her own.
She does. She portrays those tough, brilliantly.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, you mentioned the Bruce-ploitation craze, the Bruce Lee knockoffs.
Exactly.
Well,
it lasted for like 15 years. They couldn't find anyone.
Well, it's funny too. I think it's worth noting. So the director of this movie, Lo Wei, after Bruce Lee had passed away, they tried doing a sequel to Fist of Fury. They called it New Fist of Fury. And in that one, the Bruce Lee clone, or the actor they got to replace Bruce Lee in that one, was a young Jackie Chan. And I know he had a hard time doing that one because Jackie Chan, his instincts, he wants to be funny. He wants to be more, not athletic, but more stunt oriented. Jackie Chan has his own style. And he said, like, early on in his career, when they were trying to make him the next Bruce Lee, it just wasn't the right fit.
In fact, I remember Jackie did a movie, a Hollywood movie. They brought him, and it was a very cool movie, actually, where he enters this street brawl fight. It's called Bronx something.
Oh, no, The Big Brawl, I think.
The Big Brawl.
Yeah.
That was excellent. Same team that made Enter the Dragon made that movie. They really tried to make Jackie the next. And I loved it. I thought Jackie was excellent in that movie. But again, for an American audience, and when I interviewed Jackie all the way back for Venice Magazine, that's one of the things I personally told him, because he said to me, I've never been accepted in America. Why is that, do you think? And I said, because Americans like their action heroes serious. Where in Hong Kong, you do a punch and you can make a funny face. We don't like that in our action heroes. We want our action heroes to be badass, like Clint Eastwood, like John Wayne, like Rambo. They don't smile. They kick ass. They're serious. They're not goofy. And it's so funny. He took that seriously. Because if you look at Post, he did a movie called... his first big movie was called Bronx something.
Rumble in the Bronx.
Rumble in the Bronx.
Yeah.
By the time he found Chris Rock, then he started to be more serious. Let Chris do the comic shit. If you look at those movies, Jackie toned down the goofy stuff tremendously and let him be the goofball.
So he's more, so Chris Tucker in Rush Hour, right? They get Chris Tucker. Yeah.
If you watch it with that intention of what I just told you, notice that Jackie became more serious. He was smart enough to take that. And in fact, my favorite movie of Jackie is The Foreigner, where he's completely dead serious in it. Have you seen Foreigner?
Yeah, with Pierce Brosnan. Yeah, yeah. Great film.
Movie. That is honestly, for me, one of Jackie's best movies because he shows his skill sets. But he was serious. He's not goofy, and he's believable. And he plays like a oh, what a movie! I've watched that more than once. It was so good.
Yeah. And that was directed by Martin Campbell, who did the
Yeah,
James Bond movies, GoldenEye, Casino Royale, two of the best ones in the
brilliant.
franchise.
It,
Yeah.
it makes a difference. It makes a difference who directs.
But I just want to give a little note. I'm a big Jackie Chan fan, and I grew up in the '90s. So my first exposure, of course, it was Rush Hour, Shanghai Noon, which are wonderful. They're fun movies. Don't get me wrong. But a few years ago, I saw Police Story for the first time, and that
Yeah.
movie blew my mind because I was looking at. Can you imagine, like in Hong Kong, excuse me, in Hollywood, you have so many stunt teams and regulations, and you have to do it by the book, and you don't want anyone getting hurt, obviously. But in Hong Kong in the mid '80s, they did not care about any of that. They were just trying to get the coolest shots they could get.
Jackie says he was able to shoot during the day. He had an editing bay at the back of his car. He would literally, he told me this himself. He says, I would shoot, I would edit, and the next day I would get up and shoot more if I didn't catch what I wanted. So
Mhm.
it was crazy. He would literally say he would edit the movie overnight and continue. He goes, there was none of these regulations. We were able to do what we wanted. We delivered
Yeah.
goods. If someone got hurt, we got someone else. He goes, that's what stuntmen get paid for. It was unbelievable. Some of the stunts in those police stories, I mean, even I'm sure he would not do it again. With the
Oh,
skates on the bus when he comes down those glass tower with
oh, in the mall with the lights. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh, you know how dangerous that was? There was real electricity. He was like popping the bulbs as it comes down. It's
Well,
crazy. I mean, he told me, he said he has almost broken every bone in his body. He has so many stitches, and
I'm surprised he's alive. You look at some of those stunts, and it's like it's a blessing he's still with
it
us.
really it really is. I think he just done a new movie. I think he just done actually Jackie did a movie with Benny was involved in the background because it was with
John Cusack is a
John
Dragon
Cusack,
Blade. I did
exactly.
see that one. Yeah, yeah.
John Cusack, Jackie Chan, and who's the third one? There's a third character as well. And that movie was, I knew about that long before it was made because it was a collab that they wanted to, and Benny was involved in the choreography and stuff on that. I remember. But it's so great that we can still talk about these and discuss it for the new generation, and they can watch it all over again and fall in love with someone like Bruce or Jackie.
It's absolutely no, no, certainly. And I just want to mention real quick, Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee, we know them as action stars, right? They were really incredible at what they did, but I think they don't get enough credit as creative forces. He said Jackie Chan, he was the director, he was the editor, like that was his vision,
It was.
right?
He did everything. He cast, produced, wrote, came up with the idea.
He sang the theme song at the end of the movie.
I forgot he's a pop star there too. You're right.
Yeah. But then, Bruce Lee again, Way of the Dragon, wonderful movie for what it is, but we were robbed that we didn't get to see
Oh
his
yes,
the evolution of that.
unbelievable. Yeah, really. And even in those movies, he was held back. Because
Yeah.
the Golden Harvest would say, "No, we can't do that. No, we can't." So, and I heard, I forgot who he wanted originally for the Chuck Norris role. It was someone else. There was someone else he had in mind for that role. It didn't work out. It was a grandmaster, a Asian guy actually, who was a very famous fighter in the time. But then he ended up with Chuck because Chuck was the reigning world karate champion.
Mm-hmm.
A big ego too. Because when he came, he goes, "So what are we doing?" He goes, "Well, you fighting me, but," he goes, "Do I lose?" He goes, "Yeah, you gotta lose."
Yeah.
Chuck was not happy with that. He goes, "You're not gonna kick my ass." He goes, "No, first you kick my ass, then I kick your ass. Don't worry, you have your moment."
Well, I was just watching a biography of Bruce Lee, and they mentioned when they were doing the Green Hornet Batman crossover in the script, they wanted
Yeah, yeah.
Kato to lose to Robin. He says, "I'm not going to lose to Robin," so they ended in a draw.
Oh, yeah. He said it's not believable. He was
Yeah.
right. I mean, come on.
Right.
Look, Robin looked like he was in West Hollywood.
Oh yeah, no, well, that costume and everything, and I mean, it is what it is. But honestly, Jay, it's always a pleasure getting to talk with you. Thank you so much for doing this with
Likewise.
me.
And thank you to the audience, and I hope you enjoyed this movie.
If you're in the audience, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we had having it. Once again, I'm Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.
Ciao.